So today I want to talk about critical thinking. And this has been something that's been kind of hot button, kind of on my radar for a while. And a while can be defined as about 2015, 2016, which politically was the first Trump election. And the reason that I was so aware of this and paying attention to it is it seemed like every time I saw something in the media, not every time, but most times, I'd look at that and I'd go, well, that's not true. And yet here was a pundit, a pontificator, and a politician, sitting there trying to say, well, no, this is the way it is. And I'm like, no, it's actually not. And that was not unilateral, that was bilateral. And later that summer or fall or whenever it was, I remember listening to this interview with this guy on this podcast. And the guy was a professor from the University of Kansas. And they had done this experiment, this social experiment. When I was in undergrad and graduate school, I knew these guys that did this, these professors. And that's kind of one of their reasons for being is they're always doing experiments and trying to draw data from humans and correlations and causations and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'm listening to this guy being interviewed, and he says it's the strangest phenomenon when it comes to the political stuff in America, and this would have been 2015, 2016. He goes, our research proves definitively that once somebody makes an opinion, even if you conclusively prove to them it's false, they probably won't believe you. Now, just stop for a second and just think about that, okay? And I'll just use a dumb example to make my point. Let's say that you look outside and it's snowing. And so there's two people standing there, and one person goes, oh my God, look at this snowstorm. The other person looks at him and goes, it's not snowing, it's sunny. Well, no, it's snowing. Can't you see it? Well, what do you mean? It's blue sky. It's 75 degrees. What are you talking about? Okay, so that's just a dumb little example, but it makes the point that needs to be made, and that is even in the face of completely different data right in your face, some people still are just like, oh no, it's what I want to believe. Okay, so this is really what I want to kind of get into today. Not super deep, but we're going to talk about it, is people's perceptions, how people interpret data, and how people either are what I call doctors or lawyers. Okay, now let me just take a minute and give you my quick sermon on this doctor-lawyer thing, okay? It's a great analogy. So when a lawyer goes out into the world to be a lawyer, here's what they do. They start at the end and they work back to the beginning. In other words, what they do is they start with the conclusion that they want, and then they build the case backwards to the present. Their intention is to lead the audience, typically the judge and or the jury, to a conclusion that the lawyer is advocating. Okay, now let's just stop there for a second. I'm not making lawyer jokes, okay? I'm just saying this is their charge. It's how they're trained. It's the job they're hired to do. And if you need a lawyer, that's probably what you want them to do, right? Okay, so that's the job of the lawyer. Now, let's set that aside and go to the job of the doctor. The doctor is in much more of a diagnose and then prescribe environment, okay? The doctor walks in, hopefully, with no predetermination at all about outcome. The doctor walks in, they say, oh, well, let me ask you some questions, this, that, the other thing. Then they kind of poke at you and do their stethoscope, whatever they're doing, maybe need some more tests, whatever it is. So the doctor is really in the data collection business first, and the diagnostic business second. Okay, so that's two highly regarded professional licenses in American society, and they approach their work life in entirely opposite ways. Okay, so I'm going to make a stand right now and advocate for a position. I'm going to advocate that most of us should work on being doctors and not lawyers. Okay. It is a better result, a more honest result, a more livable result if we can walk into the world with open-mindedness instead of closed-mindedness, and the ability to question things and organize data and whatever, and get to a result, okay? And have the data lead you to the result, have the facts lead you to the result, have your reasoning and critical thinking skills lead you to the result, instead of starting at the end and going, well, this is a villain, or this is a problem, or this is wrong, or whatever that end result is, and then working back to prove your case accordingly. We have lived in our lifetimes, especially in the last 8 or 9 years in American politics. This is how society has functioned. This is the national conversation. This is the constant drone of one side versus the other. And here we are as the audience. Okay. Now I'm just using politics as an example because it's an easy example, one we're living in, every moment of every day right now, at least in America. And so these kinds of things, what they do is they shape opinion, and opinion shapes outcome. Okay. Now that's not a complete, I didn't say that as causation. I said it more as correlation. All right. Now let me stop there for a second, because that's an important point. Those two words that really juxtapose each other, causation and correlation. So these two words are embedded in something you may have heard of, like in junior high school, called the scientific method. All right. And so the scientific method attempts through hypothesis and elimination and ultimately result to unwind these notions of causation and correlation. Okay. So let's just take a real estate example. All right. So you would say, oh, prices are up 20%. Why is that? So many people's initial response is to correlate that and say, because everything else in the country is up, because of inflation, that kind of stuff, therefore, real estate prices have risen 20%. They're correlating external data to be able to support the point they're trying to make today, not the observation, but the point that they're trying to make today. Okay. Causation is different. If someone says, oh, real estate prices are up 20%, why is that? A causation argument could be interest rates, simple time value of money. Okay. So the payment stays the same, the loan amount goes down. So that's a problem, but because of the supply and demand factors in the marketplace, prices have held and they have not dropped. Okay, so it's those kinds of things. Now, the phenomenon of causation correlation is kind of a sidebar. It's kind of an advanced thing, but since it was front of mind, I brought it up, okay? What I want to do right now is to go through 10 different things that I've come up with that I think are foundational to this idea of critical thinking skills, okay? And this week I have some new technology. I went through, I think, 5 different tablets to be able to get one I could actually write on. And so I'm going to present that to you today, all right? Hopefully this works. All right, so number 1, if you want to write this down, is to define, here's the problem with technology when you've got to change all your stuff. Let's try that. Okay, so 1 is to define your objective. Now, what I'm talking about with this define your objective business is not so much just being data and fact driven, but it's also being mindful of the relationship. Okay. So there's three things I'm going to write down underneath here. So one is it necessary? Now, let me pause here for a second under this is it necessary thing. Most of the time, I've thought about this a lot. Most of the time, if not all of the time, if you find yourself in a moment of what I call critical thinking, most likely what's happening is you are in disagreement with another person's opinion or position. Okay. Not always, but most of the time that's what it is. So when I say, is it necessary? What I'm hinting at here is your inquiry about this, and I'll talk about inquiry in a little bit here. Is this going to really upset the other person, destabilize the relationship? Can you live without knowing this? That kind of thing. That's what I mean by is it necessary? Okay. Number two, is it true? Okay. So is it true means is what they're saying you true? Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I brought this up, the questioning of is it true, is because oftentimes I find myself, and someone pointed this out to me in my 30s, which was 30 years ago, that sometimes I just get in conversations just to disagree with people. I've been known to do that, right? And that's a good kind of tap the brakes and check in with yourself, because if that's all I'm doing, I'm definitely risking number one, which is it necessary, which could harm the relationship. And that kind of brings me to number three, which is will it cause harm? So this first thing that I'm talking about, define your objective. This is what I call an external. All right, because the inquiry really is about the other person. I have both externals and internals. This is what I call an external. Okay. All right, so stop there. Okay, that's the first thing that I think you need to assess. Now, as I went through this and thought about this and how I was going to present it, I was thinking to myself, well, I don't make this too complicated, or else people just aren't going to do anything. And a part of the reason I do this is I want you to kind of check in with yourself and kind of see where you are on all this and then make adjustments as needed. So let me just kind of summarize and capstone the first thing I think you need to do before you endeavor in critical thinking. And that is, if it's going to require disagreeing with another person, you should just kind of take pause and ask yourself those questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it going to hurt the relationship? I think that's very sound counsel, number one. You don't have to do this on stupid little stuff that doesn't really matter. Okay? All right. Number two. No bias. If you are going to be a critical thinker, by definition, you are thinking without bias. All right. This is difficult, especially if you have strong preconceived biases. All right. Now, if we have time at the end, I'm going to come around and do a little question thing. I want to get through this first. But for now, let me just say that if it is your intention, if it is your desire to start engaging in critical thinking, the number one thing that you have to do as a human being is to set aside your own biases. And everybody has biases. We all do, including me. Okay, so this one is going to be an internal. Sorry, didn't have the camera on there. This is an internal. Okay, let's go to the third one. And the third one is question others. So this can be very uncomfortable. But it is also required. You have to become a person who is not only able, but willing to question others if you're going to engage in this critical thinking thing. And I try to keep the questioning pretty simple. I oftentimes say things like this. So what do you mean by that? That's all I say. So what do you mean by that? I'm not really following here. Can you explain that a little bit more? No, I don't want to come across just being dumb. So why do I say that? Well, I have this best friend guy who lives in Idaho, and we talk a couple times a week. And somehow, some way, we always kind of drift towards the political stuff. He likes to talk about that. And, you know, I'm not a junkie when it comes to that kind of thing, but I'm also not an idiot. I'm like, I try to stay abreast of current events. I mean, I'm a member of the world and I want to see what's going on, but I don't get punch drunk on it, but I'm not an idiot, you know? And what's interesting is when he and I start getting into these conversations, and it's mostly him talking and me listening, unfortunately, I find myself questioning him from time to time for point of clarification. However, his method, and he's an attorney, is to sort of come back to me and say, well, I don't understand. And then he'll frame a question as a sort of rhetorical gotcha. And last week it got kind of hot and heavy. And I finally just said to him, look, man, I'm not going to agree with you. Okay. It's not going to happen. And this little way of being in the world, this I don't know, I said, Steve, if you really don't know, if that's genuinely the position that you're in, my recommendation is take some more time to learn about the world around you instead of just coming to these conversations confessing your ignorance, because you're a smart guy and that doesn't impress me. Now, he and I have been friends for a long time. He was the best man at my wedding. And so I find in that relationship that there's enough safety that I am going to poke a little harder at him than I might somebody else. Okay. And I tend to kind of be that person anyway, which sometimes rubs people the wrong way, as many of you know. But that's just a role that I play, and I'm okay with it. And as with all things, nuance is the better part of valor. All right. So you don't want to just go in and be an a-hole, be a bitch, whatever, and just in your face. This is not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is having a sense of personal security where you have the willingness and the bravery sometimes to stand up and say, I don't really get what you're saying by that. Can you expand on that a little bit? And sometimes I'll say that even when I know exactly what people are talking about, because it's so obtuse. But this habit that you need to cultivate of questioning, a very foundational critical thinking skill. Do you think this is easy? This is not easy. I had to buy all this equipment, set all this stuff up, write all these scripts, shoot all this, and then there's just the editing. I mean, sometimes it takes over 2 hours just to get a sentence right. So why do I do all this? Simple. Because I love you. And all I want in return is a little love back. All you have to do is ring that little bell so you can like me and follow me. And you know what? You don't even have to like me. You can just ring the bell. And at any point in the future, if you decide I'm out, then just unring the bell. Hell, my ex-wife did it and she did pretty well. But for now, please just ring the bell. Thank you. Okay, the next one is to avoid yes, Y-E-S, men and women. So avoid the yes people. About 10 years ago, I had this assistant, great guy, and had a great relationship. He was a good assistant. We got along well. It was all that. And whenever I asked him to do something, he always say yes, every time. And then eventually I started figuring out that he would say yes, but the real answer was no. Like he wasn't doing what I told him to do. Okay. He was just a yes man. And those people do exist in the world. I'm not saying everybody is, because that's not true, but they do exist. And you want to be careful to avoid those kind of people, right? That's not, you're not going to get through a session of successful critical thinking with someone who only knows how to say yes to be an appeaser, right? Okay, next one, and this one's pretty important. I mean, they're all important, but this one I think is especially important. You have to embrace change. Embrace change. So the interesting thing about critical thinking, at least as I understand it, is that it's not a bright line test. It's not an absolute yes to absolute no thing. It is oftentimes a sharpening of interpretation, okay? Change is hard and people don't like it, generally. Okay, humans are creatures of habit. Once someone has formed an opinion about something, they usually don't like changing their mind. Okay, so I'll use an example from a couple weeks ago. And if I get this wrong, this is a Kelly example. So Kelly, if I get this wrong, make sure you instruct me. But she was in a situation as a listing agent with a seller who really believed that their belief about price was true, accurate, and correct. And Kelly's like, no, it's actually here, which is lower than what they thought. Okay. Is that what happened? There was a husband and a wife, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we've all had that.
Well, yeah, exactly. For sure. And so this idea of embracing change, I'm applying this to your client at the time, for them to have a successful outcome, which is really what a lot of this stuff is in service of, is having a successful outcome. What that person needs to do, or needed to do if they haven't done it yet, is to buy into this idea of embracing change and not having bias and being open and not just questioning the externals, but also questioning the internals. Okay. So, I can say this, I think, with some level of accuracy and hopefully humility. I have worked on changing certain parts of myself over time. I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago, nor should I be. That's called growth and maturity. And if I'm selling it, hopefully I'm buying it too. And there was a time in my life when I was like, no, F you, I know I'm right. I'm not going to change. All right. Now, sometimes there's a time and place for that, for sure. But in the larger conversation, this idea of being open to change, embracing change, including maybe I was wrong, that will get you a lot farther in life than just planting your flag and saying, there will be no movement, don't try, on all things, okay? Some things, yeah, but all things, no, okay? And what I found from my own observation of myself and of other humans is that, it's the old saying of the way you do anything is the way you do everything. If you don't change your mind about this, you probably don't change your mind about much of anything. Okay, and that's probably not going to serve you in the larger sense of your life. There will be episodic times when it does. But I think that the greater good for your own outcomes, selfishly, is probably served better by being open to this idea that, if I'm wrong, I'm willing to modify my own point of view. All right. So that's the context I'm delivering this in. I'm going to say this again. There are certain episodic things where you don't want to change your mind. Okay. And even in the no matter what context, but in the larger sense of your life, the things you do every day, just your being in the world, personally and professionally, if you combine this idea of the possibility that maybe I need to adjust my own point of view, you'll be better served in the long run. That's my point. Okay. And you can take from that what you like. You can embrace your own change and take that as you like. And this would be an internal. Okay, and that leads me to a pretty simple number 6. Which is you must cultivate the habit of being defenseless. There's only so many seconds in a 1-hour presentation. And this is a topic that a lot of us should probably take a personal day of therapy and sit down and really dig into this and learn how to do it. Because many of us show up being defensive, and that is the antonym of critical thinking. Okay, you cannot be defensive. Okay, now, being defenseless does not mean this is not that you must agree with something you don't agree with. This is just saying, don't be defensive when someone presents an idea or you're in a conversation where there's a lack of agreement. And this would be another internal. Okay, so let me just stop there for a second and just do kind of a quick group survey, just by show of hands in the affirmative, if you agree. I tend to be somewhat of a defensive person. Be honest. Okay, one hand went up, and I bet there's more. And the interesting thing about that question is that's one of those questions where, okay, I'm asking you and you don't think so. But what if I asked 5 people who knew you really well, what would they say? See, that's one of those kinds of questions. All right. So if you're brave enough, you might want to go to people who know you in safer relationships where honesty is something that we do with each other. And just ask them, do I come across as a defensive person? What do you think? And just check it out and see what you think. But under the banner of critical thinking, being defenseless is a big deal, okay? And what this defenseless thing really requires, which is difficult for people just depending on who they are, but what you need is, in fact, a sense of personal security. Okay, yes, that is a therapy term, and yes, it does apply here. All right, many of us lack this. Many of us do. Okay, and personal security should not be confused with arrogance. Okay. Personal security is really just being confident for whatever reason you want to. Okay. So I'm going to go back to politics for a second and just pick a little snippet that it applies to what I'm saying here. Again, by show of hands, did anybody see Elon Musk and Trump in the Oval Office a couple days ago with his kid when he was talking about all they're doing? Okay. So there's this one part in there where Musk said in his own way, I'm going to be scrutinized. In fact, he referred to proctology is what he did. Okay, if you remember that part. And if you want to go back and watch it, that was kind of an important moment because basically what he said was, I am secure enough in myself and in what I'm doing that I don't care about all the people that are picking on me because I'm doing it. Okay. Now, I'm not going to judge whether that was right or wrong. Okay, that's up to you. And I'm not here to change your mind, whatever it is. Politics is a hot topic. I obviously get it. But if you can just kind of take that one moment of what he said and expand it, what he was saying to the world was, I have a high level of personal security. I'm a confident human being, and I really believe that what I'm doing is the right thing. If you can take that magic and put it in your own bottle and walk out into the world, you're basically invincible. You are. And so many of us get so persuaded by the biases and opinions of others when we really shouldn't. And oftentimes what happens, and this is just, I don't know if it's just the people I pick or people are close to me, but the manifest of that oftentimes is in people's poor self-image. They look at themselves far more poorly than everybody else around them does. Well, what's that all about? That's not personal security. That's personal insecurity. And a lot of us should think about that and try to adjust. Okay. Next one, number 7 of 10. Living in curiosity. All right. I'm going to put a little quote under here. Not a quote, but a thought. Be a child. On our journey, if I can use that word, journey, going from being a child to being an adult, this is one of the things that we tend to shed. And we should find it back. Be a curious person. Wonder about things. Ask questions about the world that you live in. And I think we can all agree, as not being children here today, that the world is by orders of magnitude moving so much faster than it did when we were children, just demographically. But finding our way back to that garden and cultivating that way of being in the world of curiosity, it's magic. It opens you up to a whole new set of possibilities, which is another foundation, in my view, of critical thinking. Okay, so be a curious person. This is a good thing. All righty. Okay, this is a really important interpersonal skill, what I'm going to talk to you about next year. Number 8. Authentic consideration of others' opinions. And this is both internal and external. All right. Authentic consideration of others. Acknowledging others' opinions as being important, as having merit. Being respectful about having those opinions, even when you disagree with them. Okay. And this is such a key thing. Most of us think that if I don't agree, then we're in conflict. Well, that could be the result. But the better result when you disagree is at least have that mutual foundation of, I respect your opinion. I just don't agree with it. Okay. I get where you're coming from. Totally. I don't need to be explained to again. I understand. I'm just not with you on this one. Okay. We need to get back to that in our tight, close relationships and as a larger society. I really believe that we've lost our way when it comes to that authentic consideration of another opinion, even when we disagree with it. Okay. It's an important human skill. Okay. almost done here. The next one, number 9, is what I call assessment feedback. Okay, so this is both an internal and an external. So what I mean by this, number 1, is using a skill I talk about in the negotiation course called reflective listening. If you don't know what this is, reflective listening is simply feeding back what you heard from another person in your own words to confirm understanding. Okay, so I'll just go back to Kelly's little example with her seller client. I just want to make sure I understand where you're coming from here. You think that the house is worth $500,000 because the one next door sold for $501,000. Is that right? Yes, that's why. Okay, perfect. Dumb example, but it makes the point. That's assessment feedback, okay? The other form of assessment feedback would be on a more interpersonal basis where I might, at the end of my inquiry, say to my counterpart something like, I wasn't here to upset you. I hope I didn't. Are we still okay? Just something like that. And I tend to put those kinds of check-ins at the end. All right. A lot of us haven't really thought about this or learned about it, but endings are super important. Endings are what people remember. What happens at the end of an escrow or an argument, that's the memory I'm going to take with me. The ending is a huge thing. So if I'm in a critical thinking inquiry and we've got a little blood pressure going on here, I will say something like, I wasn't trying to offend you. Are we okay? And just see what they say. Most of the time, if you approach it that way, you're probably okay, unless you really cross some lines. I know how that goes too. Okay, last one. Number 10. Sorry, I'm still trying to get used to my toy. Okay, that should be it. Okay, number 10 is no assumptions. And this is mostly about the result. And this is sort of like what I said before about no bias. It's kind of the same thing, but it's just a different level. Don't walk in to these kinds of conversations with any predetermined assumptions about what your counterpart believes or about what the outcome will be. I take you back to the doctor-lawyer analogy. The doctor has the good one, has no predetermined assumption. They're totally open to an outcome, okay? And that is one huge element of critical thinking. Okay, you're trying to be unbiased. You're trying to come up with an unvarnished conclusion. You're trying to sift through the BS and get to the truth, whatever it is. And you cannot have any investment in that result by way of bias or assumption if you're going to do this the right way. Because if you do, you're not critical thinking.